The end of the book, the end of the dawn of everything. And only humans, as we think, we're pretty sure that maybe non-human animals can communicate, but they don't write big books. I actually like the first part of this last part when they say that, you know what, if we would have done this like typical academics do, this book would have been twice or thrice, 3 times as long. So, you know, just think, could have been 3 times as long.
Is that because of more information or because of like more words that they would add in?
They say that if they did it like most scholars do, they would go through all the evidence and explain why they like one interpretation over another. So they'd have to bulk it all up, but they say that if we'd done that, if we'd gone ahead and done the way it's done most of the time, it would seem to the reader that the authors were engaged in a constant battle with demons who were in fact 2 inches tall, which is often the way I feel around here. Battling demons, constantly battling 2-inch tall demons. I think that pretty much sums up college. A constant battle against demons who are 2 inches tall. It sums up a lot of too much academic work. So instead, what they want to do is talk about what happened, in a sense of what happened in history, what happened in all this stuff. And they're only going to do the argue against when it comes to widespread misconceptions. So things that are out there in the world that people just believe, that's the only time they're going to try and argue against them. So the book only has to be this long as opposed to 3 times as long. So I actually think this is rather a perfect book for a history of anthropological thought, or a capstone, or just to take as a class, because I hope what it gives you is this idea of what's out there in the world beyond the demons that are 2 inches tall that we've been battling. What's out there in the world in terms of misconceptions, and try to address those, while at the same time giving you a sense of the excitement of anthropological and archaeological discovery. Many history of anthropological thought classes that are required for majors and minors everywhere simply take you through, well, he said this, and then this other guy said that, and then she said something, you know, and it just becomes this progression of things. For why? Progression of demons that are 2 inches tall. I shouldn't be too mean about it, but a lot of times it is. So, widespread misconceptions. What is the biggest misconception out there? The most stubborn misconception, they say. Worst. The most stubborn. Well, maybe not not the worst misconception. I think the worst misconception is that people are naturally evil. I think that's the worst one. But what's the most stubborn one?
Isn't it like the evolution thing?
The evolution thing, kind of. They say, yeah, it is related to the evolution thing. The idea of scale. And that as you have more people, if you put more people into a place, you automatically have to have complexity. And if you have to have complexity, then you're automatically going to have a hierarchy or ruling of some people over another. And if you have hierarchy, you automatically have chains of command. So their idea is, this goes back to, remember that idea of Dunbar's number, which is very appealing, that you can only keep track of 150 people in your head. And if you go beyond that, you need to start ordering them around or putting them into a Facebook account or something. So, you know, I mean, it is a pretty stubborn misconception. It's out there, it's very popular. And they say that is the one that's been hardest to refute. But they should be able to refute it, or we should be able to refute it now by looking at cities, which we have discovered through this book are not necessarily these top-down organized kinds of things, and in fact are organized in all kinds of different ways. And Felicia, we have a problem with the cities. Is that what's the problem that what when we look back at these cities in early history and look back at the archaeology, what's the problem?
No, we don't have the right words to describe it.
We don't even have the right words. Oh, good. I should have used that. The right words, the vocabulary to describe early cities. We don't even know how to describe them. So as soon as we describe them, we start describing them as these hierarchical things. In actuality, maybe we shouldn't even use the term cities because they're so variable. They're so different. We should come up with good words to describe them. Settlements. Maybe settlements work. They say that one of the misconceptions is that they were, the idea that the city is where the civilization developed, that in fact, if we look at Marcel Mauss and his idea of this, what a true civilization is, a large hospitality zone where people can move back and forth and at least find people who would be important to them, then in fact, those existed before the cities. And you don't have to read French to read Marcel Mauss. You can read him in translation, but the cover in French looked better with those piercing eyes. And sometimes French does look nice, Look at that. That's some good French right there. Probably you can guess what it says too. So in their terms and in Mauss's terms, what the first cities did was not invent civilization, but take those already existing norms in the wider society and sort of smush them down into a smaller space. So if we can understand that, then maybe we can get rid of those stubborn misconceptions that people can only govern, people can only organize if they have government and they have people bossing them around. And in fact, there's all kinds of ways to do this that are from the bottom up. Now, they do say, of course, and we've seen that there are monarchies, there are kings and leaders and powerful people that do come up. And these sometimes come up and take over cities or grow within cities. But more often than not, they are claiming the kings, the monarchies, these systems of rule, top-down domination, arise outside of the cities, often on the margins of cities. Often in what they have called heroic societies. I'm thinking of Lord of the Rings types, where they're all ruled by the kings. Except for the hobbits. I don't think there's a king of the hobbits. They're self-organized, but, there's a mayor. It's been a while. Yeah, these would be the heroic societies. Anyway, they're saying that those didn't necessarily, they weren't a consequence of the cities. In fact, they were often as on the outskirts of them in the smaller societies. Make a super interesting point about the relationship between kings and slaves. PowerPoint told me to do as a king on a chessboard and a pawn on a chessboard, which I thought was a perfect example, right? They have these two pieces that can only move one at a time.
Why are they different colors?
Why are they different colors? Well, because it might be, that pawn's got that king in jeopardy. They're from two different teams. Anyway, they say that the kings and slaves are actually structurally the same in the sense that neither one is supposed to have any family. The king, because he usually is way above the law and has no relatives except their own relatives, except the royal family, which is, but they're supposed to be above it all. Whereas, as we've seen, enslaved people are unable to have friends and relationships. So they say that basically, when you have kings and slaves, you're talking about people that are structurally similar, just on completely opposite ends of the power spectrum. And as we know, if the pawn can make it all the way to the end, then the pawn becomes, well, I guess you usually become a queen, but same thing. You can, you just get to the opposite end of the power spectrum and become all powerful. Whereas the king, what a weak piece. Anyway.
Why would anyone turn their pawn into something else that would be the point?
Why would you turn your pawn into anything but a queen? Well, the answer to that is, any chess players here? I hear it's really popular now. There have been these revivals of chess all over the place, and it's actually making teachers mad in elementary schools because the kids are just being too aggressive with their chess. I tell you that people will always find something to be mad about. Now it's chess. Huh?
Better than just spending all their time on electronics.
You'd think it would, but it's noisy. I like it when they're just passive. They're like hitting each other, I guess. Maybe it's too aggressive. I don't know. Why would you turn anything into anything but a queen? I forgot the rules of chess, but you can't have two queens, right? What if you already have a queen? Then you have to turn it into something else. You can have two queens?
Like on the computer version, definitely. But I don't know what that means.
That sounds suspicious. Getting two queens. Really? All right. Well, sounds like a lot of queens. Yeah. Well, this is bringing up all kinds of weird points. So, yeah, right. We're looking at these kings and the slaves and the relationship. Again, going back to this idea that there was a relationship between being able to exercise warfare-like violence on other people and the internal care. And they introduced us to a new friend of ours, Franz Steiner, who's one of the, apparently a super influential but died way too young anthropologist, bohemian, like literally bohemian, like as in born Bohemia type, who was, you can't read him because he published almost in no books. Well, one of his books was stolen apparently on a train, all his notes. He did publish this book called Taboo. That's the only book I could find on eBay. Anyway, apparently he was very influential in his time, but nobody knows about him. His book that he wanted to write was about what he called pre-servile institutions or pre-enslavement institutions, and talked about people who were unmoored from their social situation and had to be refugees. And that's actually what happened to him and his parents. His parents perished in the Holocaust, but he had to go to various places to try and escape it. And I think apparently the grief of losing his parents to the Holocaust apparently also cost him as well. But what he says is that over time there was this erosion of the norms of hospitality, the idea that you had to or should shelter the refugees or people who were seeking asylum in your own land. Yeah, what happened to the hospitality norms? Boy, those eroded. Nobody gives a. Anyway, what Steiner was claiming is that what happens is if those hospitality norms get eroded, those things we talked about as being a good thing to have if you're a member of a large civilization, being able to have a large hospitality zone, is that becomes a way in which people are able to then seize arbitrary power. I don't know. Steiner's story is pretty tragic. Apparently, he fell in love with a poet and author, Iris Murdoch, and proposed to her, and she accepted his proposal. And then, like 3 days later, he died of a heart attack. She lived longer, but I know it is sad. It's pretty sad. Anyway, it's a whole story. You can look it up on Wikipedia and other places. It's kind of fascinating, but well, save that for when you're battling demons that are 2 inches tall. These demons were probably more than 2 inches tall. They were real demons back then. They interpret Steiner as saying the somewhat curious statement that it, in the sense of this arbitrary power and being able to take over other people, all goes back to charity. How, Matt? How could this all go back to charity? What in the heck?
he basically said that, you know, he would take people in, like the prisoners, anything, anyone to like, you know, young males that were different, people that were mad, deformed, disabled, and he would take them in like he was giving them a place to stay, but really he's kind of like making them his slaves.
Yeah. So these royal courts become a refuge for all these anomalous people or people that are widowed and orphans and all these things. And the kings would make themselves out to be the defenders of widows and orphans, but they'd, yeah, at various points make them into servants or slaves or try to help them enforce the royal rule. So Graeber Wengrow at this point tell us that, you know what, we should have listened to the feminist anthropologists all along. And they cited a few feminist anthropologists here and there, but they probably should have told us we should have listened to them sooner in the book, I think. Anyway, maybe that was supposed to be the subject of their next book when they fight other demons that are more than 2 inches tall, which is that the feminist anthropologists have long told us that there was a connection between when males, usually males, start fighting other people outside the group, external male violence, and the status of women at home tends to be degraded. So again, I think that in this conclusion, they seem to be raising some issues that probably belong in a follow-up if it could ever be done. So that is where we get to. Then we get back to the whole idea of what the book is about. Why should we study these old societies and pre-servile institutions and all of these things? And what they're saying is that we should study these societies is not because we're just trying to figure out the evolutionary road to us, or the idea that, you know, that the projecting our own forms back in history, but to figure out the alternative historical possibilities, what could have been. And so, as they say on page 524, reminding us that people did act, well, wait a second, that there were all kinds of things that people did and we didn't take those roads, or but reminding us that people did actually live in those ways, often for many centuries, even millennia. So people lived differently and did different things for hundreds, even thousands of years, representing some roads not taken when we get to us. And so they say that actually this may even be more tragic than the fall from grace idea. It means we could have been living under radically different conceptions of what human society is actually about. But on the other hand, it also suggests that even now, the possibilities for human intervention are far greater than we're inclined to think. So, although it is sad that considering we could have been in a different place, it's still possible that we have alternative futures ahead. They refer back to a word they began in the book, full circle, back to the Greek notion of kairos, one of those occasional moments in a society's history when its frames of reference undergo a shift. So they believe, and sure hope this, that we are currently undergoing this radical shift in thinking, not just about the past, or maybe it's because we can start thinking differently about the past, we're able to think differently about the future and the scope for human intervention. Societies around the world appear to be cascading towards such a point. I think I would have just ended the book there, right there. That would be good. Right on page 524, I would have cut it off.